Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ron Chat with Ron Chat Music, and today we're going to be talking about connectivism, which is a learning theory that, in my opinion, is absolutely located in abundance in the field of music education, which is my field. That's the general music classroom, the band room, the choir room, the orchestra room, etc., etc., etc. So, in this presentation, I want to attack a couple of different things. I want to discuss how the learning theory helps to communicate the ways individuals learn, or in this case, our students, my students. And then I also want to inform and talk about how specifically my students' understanding of the subject matter is informed as well, in addition to how the theory can promote an inclusive classroom. We talk about diversity and inclusion a lot, so how it pulls a myriad of different elements from all over the world in terms of different cultures, different ethnicities, different ways of thinking, and other whatnots. And then finally, how the theory basically plays into how I plan a lesson or my understanding of the instructional planning. So, connectivism, in layman's terms, is basically taking one idea, whether it's the idea in the musical classroom or whatever academic idea that we're learning with the subject matter, and then finding a way to incorporate the ideas of what we find ourselves emotionally invested in or of our interest to us in everyday life, and finds a way to bring them together and apply the everyday so that we have something that we can look at as a scratching post. My colleague Jason Tomaszewski, Dr. Jason Tomaszewski, told me once that we tend to be able to relate to an idea with subject matter that we're familiar with because of the idea of building neutrons and putting more and more neutrons on an idea or memory, then the memory becomes stronger. So basically, I'll use an example. The way in which my students learn is I like to make a musical concept relevant to them. We talk about the idea of major and minor sounds, and when I play things on the piano for them, they have an idea of what major and minor sounds sound like. But then, when we have to actually apply this, we look for it in music that they find themselves familiar with in their everyday life. My students love video games, they love anime, which is Japanese cartoon, they love films, the TV shows, they love it all. So I like to use music from those particular pieces of culture and then help them develop their idea and understanding of that. So what I like to do is, in terms of planning my lesson, I have a very popular lesson for what I do is I play a bunch of different tracks on YouTube or songs on YouTube from movies they know, from animes that they know, from video games that they know, and I make them tell me if they are major or minor. A light bulb goes off of curiosity in their heads when they say, wait a minute, I know this theme, I love this song. And then I say, great, now tell me, is this in a major key or in a minor key? We already spent the lesson discussing what major and minor are, so I like to build that kind of connection with them and use subject matter that they are familiar with and have them analyze and apply the lesson content in that manner. And how exactly that helps to communicate the ways individuals learn is that when I talked about earlier with my colleague Jason Tomaszewski saying the more and more neutrons we can build to a memory, and they have a very strong memory of their favorite video games, their favorite films, etc., they've built another connection or another neutron on top of that, and ergo, they have found something else to associate with that memory. Thus, the memory becomes stronger. And particularly, what makes connectivism one of my favorite methods of learning and one of my favorite learning theories and a distinctive method here is that one of my sources from landing.athabascow.ca and a blog, it says here that while the individual parts of Stephen's version of connectivism seem to not be new and do not constitute a single theory of learning when viewed in isolation, that doesn't mean that there is no novelty in the way the parts are assembled. Indeed, that is how pretty much all invention happens. This seems to be the crux of the issue. The connectivism provides a unified model by how networks, including people's brains and their social networks, learn. This starts to look like the basis of a theory and seems more distinctive than any component so far. However, it's based on a spurious bit of reasoning. It goes off. But a little bit of that is that connectivism takes two ideas and from two different networks and manages to stick them together with one commonality. And that helps with that. And in another one, I've talked about memory from Lynn Munoz, WordPress.com, or .wordpress.com, excuse me, in the article of what is the role of memory. It says here also that essentially there is more value in knowing how to acquire knowledge, interpret the value of knowledge, and distribution of knowledge than in maintaining knowledge facts that are continuously evolving and changing. So in a lot of times in education, we have to memorize stuff. We get a bunch of terms, get a bunch of dates, and then they just say, a lot of teachers say, memorize, memorize, memorize. No. What this basically said is it's more important to take in more information and help build a connection with those pieces of information and find a way of how to generate a web and a way to tie them together rather than just getting a bunch of information that we know already and just finding a way to just memorize, just saying it a bunch of times and finding methods to maintain what we already know. It's saying we should already be learning, always learning more and more and more, instead of just being settled on trying to maintain what we already have in our memory banks. And that's particularly what connectivism helps with, is that the more and more things we can relate to the new thing that we learn, the academic thing, the academic environment musically, or the academic terminology or concept, we can apply it to a real world cultural experience. And we're gaining more and more knowledge because of the idea that we can form more and more connections to something, and we can form more and more neutrons, as I talked about, on top of our memory bank to make the memory stronger. So as far as what is connectivism, the central concept behind connectivism, I believe I already discussed, but particularly the way that wgu.edu has particularly defined this connectivism learning theory is that it says here that connectivism is a relatively new learning theory that suggests that students should combine thoughts, theories, and general information in a useful manner, which is exactly what I've done in my lesson right here with the major and minor. I have taken information that they are learning brand new, and then I'm finding a way to connect them to it with subject matter that they're familiar with, or where they already have enough neutrons and have built in a couple of connections to that memory with. With major and minor, when they listen to a track from Naruto, they'll listen to the track again, and then they'll have more perspectives or more different perspectives on how to analyze that said track and how to look at it. So with that said, I, as a natural ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system, I'm a very, very connection-oriented human being. I seek to make a connection with everybody. So just by instinct, I happen to get lucky and come across this method of connectivism in one of my learning theories, as I'm very, very much a connection-centered human, a people person, and I always seek to make some sort of connection to a human being in the hopes of understanding them and seeing what is going on in their head, in addition to my head, so I can make sense of it and maybe interpret their humanism in a way that I can relate to, because humanism is also a very, very complex idea as well. So connectivism, just with the few sources that I've shared today, to see how it informs my students' understanding is that I seek to build those neutrons. I seek to build those connections to something they already know and introduce something different that they're learning so that they can use that as a scratching post and understand the concept a lot stronger rather than just studying something that they're unfamiliar with. How can you teach something using something that students are unfamiliar with or content that they're unfamiliar with? I don't believe in that. I strongly believe that in connectivism, if students are already familiar with something, you can use that to teach them something new, because that's how we can build another chain link and create one little chain together. How it can promote an inclusive classroom also is that students are introduced to so many things in culture, and that with my students in particular, some may like anime, some may like video games. So in terms of inclusive learning, I like to incorporate different technologies that some students are a lot more apt to than other students, and vice versa. So with YouTube, some students may be more apt with the piano, some students got it more on YouTube because we learned differently, and maybe some are not familiar with a lot of the examples, or maybe they're familiar with other examples, will get the concept based on what particular genre, whether it's film, whether it's anime, whether it's video game scoring that I'm using. Now, finally, I'd like to wrap this up by talking about how specifically I structured my lesson, how I talked about my students are learning and all the great stuff that we do. And I'd also just like to wrap up by saying that connectivism is essential, not just for music education, but in any field. When you're teaching students something new, you have to start with something that they're already familiar with, or something that they already have a knowledge base on, and then use that to get your point across when you're teaching a new concept. And with that, I thank you very much for your time today, and see if you can apply that. Have a good day.